So the last speaker is Emma Talk, and she's going to speak about privacy policies on the Fediverse, a case study of Mastodon instances.
Great, thank you. Okay, so thanks, folks. I know this is the end of the session, and there is a break coming up. So thanks, folks, for sticking around. So yeah, I'm Emma. I'm from Northeastern, and this is joint work with Luis Garcia, Cynthia Lee, and Chris Martins. So there we go. So I'm guessing many of you have at least heard of Mastodon, but for those of you who have not, it's microblogging software that's been talked about a lot recently, specifically as an alternative to Twitter. Now, you may have noticed that I use the word software rather than service or platform. And the reason for this is because Mastodon isn't just one individual piece of software. It's not just one service. It's actually many. And so you can have many different types of software running many different instances of Mastodon running, and they all communicate across a shared protocol known as ActivityPub. And what's very cool about this is while we'll be focusing on Mastodon, there are many pieces of software out there that implement ActivityPub and can communicate with each other. And so in the title, you'll see there's this word Fediverse, and Fediverse really just refers to any software that implements ActivityPub and communicates with other software that implements ActivityPub. So, when people say that they are joining Mastodon, what they really mean is that they've done one of two things. Either they've joined an existing instance, or they've gone off and started running their own instance. And so to join an existing instance, you can look up ones online. There's a lot of discussion about ones that are, for example, have a lot of affordances similar to Twitter. You'll see this in a lot of discussions. This is for mscdn.social. This is talked about a lot online. It's just a general purpose one. You can also find ones that are related to work, like professional associations. So the ACM actually runs a Mastodon instance. And then there are locality-based ones. So one of the bigger locality-based Mastodon instances out there is the San Francisco Bay Area one. When you join a server, there are a set of rules and policies that are pre-existing that you have to abide by. And this is not terribly surprising given how the internet works and how other forms of social communication works. So things like Facebook groups and Reddit subreddits. So we absolutely expect to see server rules and codes of conduct that are going to be individualized for each instance. But what may surprise you is that because every server is running its own software, things like terms of service and the privacy policy may actually also differ between different instances of Mastodon. And so as an example of this, and why you might care about this, is suppose you're interested in joining a server and there's one that has a policy where, data retention policy where they auto-delete posts after 7 days, and you're considering another one that does not auto-delete. And so if you're someone who yearns for the days of BBS-style communication and you want to be having long discursive conversations with your peers and be able to search the historic records of all those conversations for future papers, you may actually prefer this no auto-delete server. But if on the other hand, you're a party hat guy and you like to have a good time on the internet and post hot takes and generally shit post, as they say, you may actually prefer these auto-deleting of posts after 7 days. And so this is a case where something that feels like it potentially is a little bit wonky, things like data retention, actually matter for the end users. So these are features that end users might actually care about when they're joining servers. Of course, you can also decide that you're not going to join someone else's server and instead just start your own instance. And if you choose to do that, you will find joy in making a variety of technical and social policy decisions for yourself. You may choose to host in your basement or on the cloud. There are also available right now some managed software that provide Mastodon as a platform. And depending on which of these choices you have, you may find yourself in a data management position where suddenly you thought this was going to be this fun thing you're doing for yourself and maybe your friends, and now you're actually managing other people's data. So in addition to the fact that you may have this new responsibility, you may find that because Mastodon is open source, you can go and change things about it that you don't like. And in that process, you can also change the privacy policy. And so you may find yourself in a situation where the privacy policy becomes desynchronized with the code. And so this is a bit of a problem, which we've heard about a lot today, and sort of long-term discussion about this as an issue in terms of abiding by regulatory requirements. Now, we first just want to note here that just because people can modify the Mastodon privacy policy and source code, it doesn't mean that they are necessarily doing that. So the first question we have is whether or not, this is something that's even relevant in the first place. And the research question we're seeking to answer here is whether admins customize their privacy policies at all. And if they do, what are the characteristics of those customizations? And what are the characteristics of the admins who make them? Now, this is a question that people have asked before in other contexts, and so I just want to bring up that Mastodon is a bit different because we're not talking about the relationship between people who are working at a company implementing privacy policies for their employer in order to abide by the laws within their jurisdiction. Instead, this is a case where people are parts of the community that are being affected by the privacy policies. So the relationship between the administrators and the members of their instances is very different from the relationship between users in your typical case and a company that needs to implement privacy policies. And so this is the classic on the internet: nobody knows you're a dog. Well, when you're running Mastodon, nobody knows that you're actually your privacy compliance officer as well as the administrator of the service. So let's take a look at this question, return to it, and break it down into a couple parts. For time, since I know, again, there's a break coming up, we are looking at basically these three different questions of whether this is a thing that exists, what are the characteristics, and questions about the people. And to answer these, we collect data in two different ways, and we perform analyses in two different ways. And so in the first case, we do some initial text analysis of publicly available privacy policies. And then to answer the latter questions, we do an administrator survey. So we need to actually identify the administrators. We send out a survey, and we describe the customizations that administrators reported making, and we learn a little bit about them. So in this talk, given the time we have, I'm going to be focusing on findings about customizations in the text analysis and just on the education and technical background of administrators. So I want to urge people to make sure that we think about what's going on in the Fediverse a bit differently from how we normally approach, things, platforms like Reddit. So I have a citation here for some work that was looking at extending the way that we think about our ethical obligations when interacting with users on platforms like Reddit beyond what the IRB requires. And so we really want to be cautious and thoughtful about using, air quotes, public data. And the reason for this is that a lot of folks in the Fediverse, according to a lot of folkloric discussions, are very concerned about privacy and are a bit prickly about researchers. So there's been a lot of research malpractice, or what's perceived to be research malpractice, and what people feel to be like one-sided, people taking advantage of this community as an object of study rather than a partnership. So in this process, one of the things that we uh, looked at was how to actually identify who all is out there. And the way that we did this, in order to identify the set of instances that exist. So the way that we did this was there are sort of two ways you can go about collecting data in the Fediverse. One is to get information from registries, and the other is to get information by crawling. And I'm skipped the slides for now, but when we go and get information via crawling, in those cases, there are a lot of prohibitions on the various instances that exist against crawling, against scraping, and there's even sometimes some norms that are a little bit anti-lurking. And so instead, we look at registries that are pre-existing in the internet, on the internet, and the two that we focus on right now are instances.social and joinmastodon.org. And so each of these registries have different statistical features that we're not going to get into in the talk, but we talk about in the paper. And so what we do in order to identify privacy policy texts for analyses is we grab instance information from these registries, and we exclude those that do not list English as a default language, those that return HTTP errors for the privacy policy endpoints that are provided with the Mastodon software, and we exclude those that are less than 10 lines long as too short. And this was a criterion that was developed by the graduate student working on this project through manual inspection. And so after collecting the privacy policy texts, we end up with 351 instances total, and about 7% of these policies had some sort of meaningful difference from the default privacy policy that ships with Mastodon. I'm not going to get into the details here, but here are a list of small edits that were added or subtracted from existing privacy policies. And there's some larger edits that substantially change the content of the privacy policies. And so one of the things that the student did was run some clustering analysis, and he also did some uh, distance analysis between the default privacy policy of Mastodon and each of the elements of our data set. And so this discourse block that you see up here, discourse actually is the privacy policy on which Mastodon is based, and EU policy.social down in that corner, that is a totally different privacy policy. And so there's a little cluster of policies that are very similar to each other. You can tell by the distance there is very low, but then EU policy is quite different from the rest of the privacy policies. So what this tells us, and what the student discovered, was that there's some evidence that there are lineages of privacy policies. And so people are basing their development of documents on existing policies that may potentially differ from those that ship with the software, which is really interesting. So, in order to learn a little bit more about the about the administrators themselves, we ran a survey. In terms of its design, there are over 50 questions with one that's mandatory. Most of them are select one or select multiple. But because we had substantial branching and conditional logic, we were able to make the survey such that it would be very short for most respondents. And so the mean response time here was 10.3 minutes. We're pretty sure that they're high quality responses after reading through them due to some correlational analysis, but also a lot of respondents availed themselves of some of the other free text options and provided very helpful information and contextualizing information to us. So we're quite pleased with the quality of the results. We had 104 respondents in total, and this population was unpaid. And so we have down here shown that we actually have two separate recruitment strategies that we used in order to identify the population. So we had our registries that were, we had determined for the use in the text analysis. Those had email addresses associated with them, and that we reached out to them. And then we had a recruitment strategy that did some snowball sampling, some snowball-esque sampling, um, leveraging one of the authors' connections within the community. So one of the authors of this paper is actually is an administrator on a Mastodon server and participates in the community themselves. So I'm going to focus again, like I said, on just one of the findings. This is exploratory, and so we're really looking at a lot of descriptive statistics in general, but looking at the educational and technical backgrounds. Our expectation was that administrators, so we had 48 respondents total who responded to this particular question. And our expectation was that administrators would demographically and educationally look more like programmers than like compliance officers. And we found that generally borne out by the prevalence of security and operations backgrounds in our respondents. And in particular, we believe that the intersection of these two backgrounds plus some of the free text responses led us to believe that there's potentially a high proportion of DevOps folks who are running Mastodon servers, which makes sense because that's what, that's a skill set that makes it very easy to run a Mastodon server. Also, unsurprisingly, we had very few folks with backgrounds in law. What was surprising was that in our snowball sample, we had a fairly large proportion of people who reported uh, informal educational experience in policy, interest in policy, and so that was pretty cool. We think that this is a sampling bias issue due to the low prevalence in our outreach group. And so you can see quite a few folks responded for the outreach within the outreach group that no one had a background in policy whatsoever. Um, Now, I would note that the fact that people were asked background questions in the first place is dependent on conditional logic. So we actually did not ask this question of every participant. And the reason was that we were really only interested in the backgrounds of folks who actually made changes to their privacy policies. We wanted to know more about the people who were choosing to edit these documents. And according to the previous question that gated to this question, over 50% of respondents claim to have written a partially bespoke policy. So they did something to the policy where they felt they could claim that it was partially written from scratch. And this very high percentage is in contrast to the less than 10% of policies that differed in the text analysis that we had previously performed. So some hypotheses for why this is the case. It's possible and quite likely that the policy text sample favors those who use the default policy because of some of the requirements of who is on joinmastodon.org and who gets scraped and they used to be scraped, they're no longer scraped, they're not only opt-in, but the folks who are present on instances.social, we believe potentially favors those who are using the default policy. We also believe that because respondents who chose to respond to a survey about privacy policies were going to be potentially biased in favor of those who put an effort into potentially changing or are interested in changing their privacy policies. And then there's some technical things like policy endpoint misidentification. So we were looking at the endpoint that is provided by the Mastodon software specifically. And during validation, we found some evidence that folks were actually putting links to some of their privacy policies elsewhere. And then there was definitely evidence of respondent confusion. So some folks actually had some issues differentiating between privacy policies and codes of conduct and terms of service. So all of this leads into, just the observation that using some of the convenience samples that exist via the registries and then using our snowball samples aren't necessarily going to be representative of the entire population of privacy policy or of administrators in the Fediverse. So there are really interesting sampling problems here. So you folks are probably most interested in what you can offer because it's the pets community. And so the thing I really want to highlight here is that it is imperative to enhance support for administrators. So admins are unique stakeholders because they are members or users of their systems as well as being administrators. And this puts them in a unique position in comparison with a lot of other folks who are responsible for privacy policy enforcement. And so admins we found in our surveys were actually quite interested in some of these problems and are looking for help. And in particular, they're feeling very uncertain about changing their privacy policies when they're interested in them because they don't know the implications for them as small communities who are responsible for each other's data. And so having things like community tested and community collaboratively authored repositories of policy documents would be very helpful for this community. And also having alternative tools to explore the space of possible outcomes should there be some sort of privacy incident. And so in particular, looking at the interaction between software, policies, regulations, and users, these are really hard to reason about, and being able to tell stories about this and generate stories automatically would be very helpful for this community. And so that's the high-level overview of the paper. Please reach out to me if you have questions.
Yeah,
And
thank you very much, Emma. Perhaps we can take one quick question or one and a half. Yep.
Hi, Emma. This is Adam Aviv from GW. This is really great work. It's so good. I actually had a very similar idea at some point. So congratulations. It's really amazing. I have a question about the Discord policy. So this is listed on their GitHub account. So I'm wondering how stable that is and how in line that is with actual Discord and why the Discord policy. Like, does that even really apply properly to Mastodon? So just a little curious.
So it's actually discourse.
Oh, discourse.
Yeah, and it's also discourse from like 2016 or 2017. And so it's really, we probably should have tagged it with discourse 17 or something like that, because I believe discourse has actually diverged from that original template. They're still quite close. And if you can actually, I did a lot of reading through GitHub issue history. And basically the Mastodon folks were in discussion about how they're pretty sure they needed a privacy policy, but they had no idea what to put. And they were like, hey, discourse is sufficiently similar to the tool that we're providing, so let's just start with that. Their original privacy policy, theirs looked like a code of conduct, which doesn't actually make a ton of sense to ship with Mastodon, considering that people have radically different expectations about how the server should operate in terms of governance. So
yeah,
I hope that answers that question.
Thank you so much, Emma. So feel free to reach out to Emma probably if you have more questions. Let's thank Emma and all the speakers and everybody who asked questions as well.